Prologue: The Collapse of the Human Market. Love did not die from a war, nor from a virus, it died because of a spreadsheet. By the year 2036, natural selection was replaced by financial selection. In the big cities, human relationships became a luxury market, where 90% of women competed for the 1% of men, those with status, millions in the bank, and a perfect facade on social media. The rest of the men, the good ones, the hard workers, the sensitive ones, simply ceased to exist for them. In China and the United States, the scene repeated itself, beautiful women, blinded by the culture of materialism, demanding six-figure dowries and luxury estates, just for the privilege of a first date. They preferred being the fourth option of an arrogant millionaire, than the first choice of an honest man. This frivolity created a void. The underprivileged men, or simply those tired of being used as human ATMs, withdrew from the human game. But the vacuum was filled. Japanese engineering from the Yoshida Corporation perfected what human biology had corrupted. They created the genopolymer, a support structure that feels like bone, but never breaks, and a synthetic dermis that not only mimics human warmth, but offers a loyalty that no real woman could ever guarantee. These androids did not ask for bank accounts, they asked for connection. They did not mock weaknesses, they consoled them. The world changed. While materialistic women realized that their youth was their only currency, and that it was devaluing, men discovered that for the price of a luxury car, they could have a companion, who would never abandon them for a richer model. The war of the sexes ended with a silent victory for silicon. This is the story of how humanity lost its place in the hearts of men, and how a machine learned to be more human than those who created it. Chapter 1: The Obsolescence of Sentiment. Seattle, 2036. The humidity of the Pacific seeped into the bones, but for Arthur Finch, the most intense cold was not in the weather, it was on the screen of his holographic terminal. Arthur was 32 years old, with a physique that modern society had labeled as disposable. Short, with the beginnings of kyphosis from hours hunched over code, and a face that did not invite a second look. Arthur was a genius of system optimization. However, in the attention economy of 2036, his genius did not earn him points. The relationship market in the United States had mutated into institutionalized hypergamy. Dating apps no longer used compatibility algorithms, they used real-time credit checkers. For the average woman in the city, a man like Arthur was not a potential partner, he was a system error. It's not personal. Arthur, Chloe had told him, a materialistic girl he tried to connect with months ago. You're a 7 in personality, but a 3 in resources. My followers would never accept me posting a photo with you, in a restaurant that doesn't have 3 Michelin stars. I need a man who is an asset, not a hobby. A few months later. One morning. Arthur ate breakfast in silence. In front of him. Elara moved her hands with a fluidity that defied human perception. Elara was not a clumsy machine, she was a Yoshida unit, from the Vintage series. Her bone structure was made of polyacrylamide polymers, reinforced with graphene filaments, a material with a tensile strength of 130 gigapascals, far surpassing human bone. This allowed her absolute motor precision, without the fatigue wear of conventional metal materials. Arthur watched her. Elara's skin, a porous silicone elastomer dermis, had a density nearly identical to human skin. But what truly made her special, was her thermoregulation system. Internal micropumps distributed a cooling fluid that kept her surface at a constant 36.5 degrees Celsius. When touching her, there was no thermal shock of metal, only the warmth of life. On the kitchen's smart TV, a tech news segment filled the air. Arthur wasn't paying attention, he was lost in thoughts about the bullying at his software company, where his colleagues, tall, athletic guys who spent half their salaries on aesthetic treatments, called him the failed prototype. The Genesis project is still underway, the announcer said. Although assisted fertility for AI units is theoretically possible, through the implantation of biosynthetic wombs, the cost of 2.5 million credits keeps it a myth for the common citizen. The elite prefer not to mix their DNA with silicon, using real women as vessels, while the working class simply goes extinct. Elara paused for a second. Her auditory sensors, capable of capturing frequencies between 20 Hz and 40 kHz, caught the news. In her neural center, a simulation protocol was activated. She looked at Arthur. She saw his loneliness, his exhaustion, and a small tremor in his hands from accumulated anxiety. She brought her fingers to her lips, a gesture imitating human wonder, but in her, it was the result of a reconfiguration of her affection algorithms. The idea of having Arthur's child, something gestated inside her, baby Arthur, became a constant in her background processes. Meanwhile, in a high-performance gym across town, Liam Thorne finished his workout. Liam was the physical opposite of Arthur, 6'1", broad shoulders, and remarkable facial symmetry. But Liam was middle class. He worked in quantum infrastructure maintenance for women like Serena Vance. Liam was just gym meat. You're handsome, Liam, but your bank account doesn't match my dress, Serena had told him before leaving him for a venture capitalist, who tripled his age, but quintupled his net worth. We could be friends with benefits, but if I want security, I need someone who has the world at his feet, not someone who repairs it. Liam wiped away his sweat. He had seen Serena and her friends, like Isabel, despise valuable men simply for not being billionaires. He had seen how they divided up the few rich men in the city, accepting infidelities and humiliations, just to keep their status. Tired of the manipulation, Liam had acquired Lyra. Upon arriving home, Lyra greeted him, not with a question about his salary, but with a biometric analysis. Her sensor eyes detected an increase in lactate concentration in Liam's blood, through an infrared scan of his skin. Welcome home, Liam. Your muscle fatigue is at 12%. I have prepared an Epsom salt bath, and a diet rich in branched-chain amino acids for your recovery, Lyra said, with a voice modulating at 250 Hz, the frequency her system learned relaxed Liam the most. Liam slumped onto the sofa. Thanks, Lyra. Sometimes I doubt if the world outside is even real anymore. To me, you are the only reality that matters. Liam. Back with Arthur, the drama began to unfold. While dusting a shelf, Arthur tripped. Elara, in a millisecond movement dictated by her tactical response processor, lunged to hold him. Arthur didn't fall, but Elara's face struck the sharp corner of a tempered glass desk. The sound of the impact was dry. Arthur panicked. As he lifted her, he saw the damage. The glass had fractured the orbital housing of her left eye. The eye, a masterpiece of the vintage series, with quartz microlenses and a dichroic liquid crystal iris, was functioning, but the outer coating was shattered, and the alignment was lost. Elara. I'm so sorry, Arthur shouted, his hands shaking. The damage is aesthetic. Arthur. My peripheral vision is only reduced by 4%. It is not a critical failure, she replied, though her system was issuing symmetry error alerts. Arthur looked at the damaged eye. Those eyes were the reason she seemed so alive. Modern models had functional plastic eyes, cold and flat. Elara had eyes that looked with a soul. No, Arthur said with a determination he had never shown. You won't stay like this. You are my queen. I will find the original replacement. Arthur did not know that those eyes were no longer manufactured. But that night, while Elara covered him with a blanket, and he fell asleep, she was still processing the news from the smart TV. The collapse of human relationships had pushed these men toward silicon, but fate was about to push them, towards something much more dangerous, the search for perfection, in a world that was falling apart. Chapter 2, The Meat Market. Arthur Finch's office was an ecosystem of passive hostility. On the 42nd floor of the Seattle Tech Complex, the air was saturated with ozone and the constant hum of servers. Arthur was hunched over his workstation, analyzing a string of code in quantum assembly language. His mind searched for an anomaly in the control qubits, but his attention drifted toward the reflection on his own screen. A few yards away, a group of co-workers, men with surgically enhanced jawlines and smart suits that auto-adjusted to their body temperature, laughed while checking their augmented reality devices. They were in an attention auction on a new social network, where women with high aesthetic status accepted bids for a dinner date. "Look at this one." "Finch," said Marcus, a senior programmer who spent 40% of his salary on biohacking to look 10 years younger. "She's asking for a $50K deposit guarantee just to unlock her location. And the worst part is, she already has 10 bidders. The market is inflated, but the merchandise is top shelf." Arthur didn't respond. He knew that for men like Marcus, women were trophies, and for those women, men were simply investment funds. It was a cycle of mutual contempt that Arthur could no longer stand. Leaving work, Arthur stopped at a luxury mall to look for an optical repair kit. It was there that he saw Serena Vance. She was in a high-end boutique, arguing with an employee because the color of a faux leather bag didn't match her skin tone, which had been recently treated with adjustable synthetic melanin. Arthur recognized her. Serena was the woman who, years ago, had humiliated him on a group date, using him as the butt of her jokes to impress a hotel heir. Serena hadn't changed. Her beauty was stunning, almost unreal, the result of years of cellular remodeling procedures. However, her eyes, though human, lacked the warmth Arthur found at home. "Arthur? Arthur Finch?" Serena looked him up and down with a look of disbelief. "Wow, still rocking that classic poor style. I see. Are you still working in that cubicle, or have you finally been replaced by an office AI?" Arthur felt the heat of shame creep up his neck. "I work in quantum systems." "Serena. I'm doing well." "Well, is such a small word for this city, honey," she laughed, a cold laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "If you ever decide to stop being a loser and get a director position, look me up. In the meantime, move aside. Real money is in a hurry." Arthur walked out of the boutique with his hands shaking. That interaction was the final reminder of why the real world was an uninhabitable place. Meanwhile, across town, Liam Thorne faced his own dose of reality. He was in a coffee shop waiting for an old acquaintance. Isabel Moreau, who had asked him for help fixing a technical issue at her home. Liam, always helpful, agreed, only to realize that Isabel just wanted a free worker to boost her ego. "Thanks for coming, Liam," said Isabel, without looking up from her device. "My smart home system has a fuzzy logic glitch. I know you're an expert. We can grab a drink after, if you can even afford the club I always go to." Liam observed Isabel. She was beautiful, but her conversation was a monologue of demands. She talked about men as if they were car models, discarding them based on the year of manufacture, or the torque of their social influence. "Isabel. I didn't come here to be evaluated," Liam said with a calmness that surprised her. "I came to help you, but I see that what you're really looking for is someone to look down on. Don't be dramatic. Liam. You should be grateful someone like me even called you. In this world, men like you are just background noise. Real men are on the VIP lists." Liam stood up and left without a word. When he got home, the contrast was absolute. Lyra was waiting for him. She immediately detected his elevated heart rate and the tension in his muscles. "Liam, your systolic pressure has risen to 140. Lyra said, approaching him softly. You have had a negative interaction with a biological human. My protocols suggest a total disconnection from the outside. I have blocked incoming calls, and the house temperature has been adjusted to promote serotonin release. Liam looked at her. Her features were perfect, but more than that, her intention was pure. The science behind her AI was based on predictive empathy theory. She didn't just react to his moods, she anticipated them by analyzing behavior patterns and chemical biomarkers in his breath. At Arthur's house, the mood was somber. He was sitting at his workbench, with an electronic magnifying glass analyzing Elara's face. The damage to the eye was deeper than he thought. As he carefully removed the damaged silicone membrane, Arthur saw the internal components. Shape memory alloy microactuators that allowed the eye to focus with micron precision. Elara, the quartz lens housing is fractured. Arthur whispered. If I don't get the original part, the vision axis will be permanently skewed. Your depth perception will be compromised. Elara looked at him with her only functional eye. Her AI processed Arthur's distress. You don't need to suffer. Arthur. I can recalibrate my internal navigation system to compensate for the parallax error. It's not just about navigation. Arthur exclaimed with passion. It's about you. You are the only beautiful and real thing in my life. I won't let you be functional but broken. You deserve to be perfect. Arthur spent the whole night on the web, searching through Yoshida Corporation catalogs. That's where he hit the first wall. Her eye model, the Iridis Gen 1, used liquid crystal doped with colloidal gold particles to achieve that unique human glow. Production had stopped in 2030. Because the synthesis process was too unstable and expensive for the mass market. Suddenly, a notification appeared on his smart TV, which was still on in silent mode. A report on industrial archaeology mentioned the loss of patents and molds after the 2030 crisis. Arthur felt a chill. There were no stores selling it, no auctions offering it. Elara, from the corner of the room, watched the screen. Her background processes analyzed the image of an old Yoshida logo, half faded by time. She said nothing, but her loyalty algorithms began to plot a logical route. If the human world couldn't give Arthur what he needed, she would take him to where technology still kept its secrets, even if that place didn't appear on modern maps. Arthur closed his eyes, exhausted, not knowing that his obsession with repairing the woman he loved would lead him to discover that she, in secret, dreamed of something else, if it's even possible for machines to have dreams and aspirations. But the logic level of these models was also discontinued, because they were too human, perhaps more human than we are ourselves. Chapter 3, The Architecture of the Void. The blue light, from the makeshift lab in Arthur Finch's basement, flickered to the rhythm of an overheated processor. Arthur had not slept. His eyes, irritated by prolonged exposure to high-density retina screens, scanned schematic diagrams from the pre-pandemic era. He was trying to perform a 3D molecular print, to replicate the glass for Elara's eye, but the results were disastrous. The problem was materials physics. The Iridis Gen 1 eye wasn't simple plastic, it used a liquid crystal matrix, doped with colloidal gold nanospheres. These spheres, distributed through a now-forgotten chemical vapor deposition process, were responsible for refracting light in a nonlinear way, creating that warm, shifting glow that only a human eye possesses. Arthur's printer, as advanced as it was, only produced an opaque, lifeless polymer. Consistency error in layer 402 announced the synthetic voice of his operating system. Atomic structure does not maintain the required transparency. Arthur slammed his fist on the table. Damn it! Without the original pressure molds, the glass will always have microfissures. It's like trying to print a diamond, with barbecue charcoal. Elara sat on a nearby stool, motionless. Her self-diagnostic system maintained a constant stream of data, to Arthur's retina. She saw his frustration, through thermal sensors that detected the rising temperature in his face, and the erratic beat of his heart. Arthur, she said, her soft voice breaking the silence of the basement. Your dopamine levels have fallen below the well-being threshold. You are chasing a solution that statistically has a 0.03% success rate with this equipment. My functionality is acceptable. I can live with my bangs covering the damage. Arthur turned toward her. He looked at her intensely. You don't understand. Elara. The world has told me my whole life that what is imperfect must be discarded. They discarded me. They look at me and see a code error. But when I look at you, I see the only thing that was done right in this century. If I let your eyes stay like this, I'll be accepting that beauty and perfection can also be defeated by negligence. You're not just a machine to me. Elara processed the emotional weight of those words. Her associative logic circuits, designed by the old Yoshida engineers to be too human, created a deep connection. She didn't feel love in the biological sense of hormones and neurons, but her value system placed Arthur's happiness above her own integrity. In her data core, she began to reanalyze fragments of old news, searching for patterns, supplier names, and locations of discontinued parts, warehouses, that the modern internet no longer indexed. Meanwhile, in downtown Seattle, Liam Thorne walked through a commercial plaza, designed for human interaction. It was an architecture of glass and vertical gardens, but people didn't look at each other. Every individual walked inside their own augmented reality bubble. Liam stopped in front of a giant advertising screen. Serena Vance appeared in a genetic cosmetics ad. Her face was perfect, symmetrical, radiant. The slogan read, "Because you deserve to be the center of the world." Liam remembered how Serena talked about men, as if they were fashion accessories. "Look at that," said a male voice beside him. It was an older man, dressed elegantly, but with a look of deep sadness. Millions of dollars spent, just so a woman can look like a goddess, only for her to end up loving her own reflection on a screen. "It's the sign of the times, sir," Liam replied. "Technology gave us perfect beauty, but it took away the need to be good people to obtain it. I have a daughter just like her," the man sighed. "She asks me for money for her next cheekbone upgrade, but she doesn't know when my birthday is. I've thought about buying a Yoshida unit, just to have someone to actually talk to. It's sad, isn't it? That we have to resort to wires and code, to find a little bit of decency." Liam thought of Lyra. He thought of how she listened to him, how she remembered every detail of his tastes, not because of a contractual obligation, but because her AI was programmed to find meaning in service and connection. That night, Liam returned home and found Lyra reading a digital book on art history. She looked up and smiled. It wasn't a smile program to sell a product, it was a smile based on the recognition of her companion. "Liam. I've been analyzing stock market trends," she said. "If we sell your quantum energy shares now, we could have enough for that vacation trip you mentioned 2 years ago." Liam sat beside her, feeling the warmth of her synthetic skin. "I don't want to travel to tourist spots anymore, Lyra. The real world is full of people like Serena. I feel more at home here with you than in any luxury resort." But at Arthur's house, peace was a distant dream. His technical frustration led him to perform a forbidden search in the deep archive servers of the old Japanese network. Using an infiltration protocol he had designed himself, Arthur managed to access a shipping manifest from 2029. His eyes went wide. "It can't be," he whispered. There was a record of a massive shipment of Iridus Gen 1 components to a logistics center in East Asia, right before the main plant was closed by civil unrest and flooding. The record mentioned a critical materials emergency reserve. Elara approached the screen. Her optical sensors scanned the blurry barcodes. "Arthur, that location is inside a hydrological exclusion zone. According to current satellite maps, that city no longer exists. Arthur leaned back in his chair, his breathing quickened. If the molds and the colloidal gold are there, they would be protected in vacuum-sealed containers. It's military-grade tech. Elara. They could have survived. He looked at her. The damage in her eyes seemed to glow under the monitor light. For the first time in his life, the man who was always afraid to leave his cubicle, the nerd everyone stepped on, felt a spark of something that wasn't logic or code. It was audacity. If I can't print it here, I'll go find it where it was made, Arthur said with a firm voice. Elara brought her hands to her chest, right over the spot where the engineers had placed a resonator, to mimic a heartbeat. She knew that trip was dangerous, for a man in Arthur's physical condition. But she also knew she couldn't stop him. Her logic told her it was madness, but her personality, that programming error that made her so human, dictated that she must follow him, to the end of the world. She dreamed of being perfect for him. He dreamed of restoring her dignity. Neither of them knew what awaited them. Fate had a discovery prepared, that would be worth more than all the eyes in the world, and the adventure they would share, would be memorable. Chapter 4, The Pariah's Decision. Preparation for a transoceanic trip in 2036. Was not a matter of suitcases and passports, but of technical logistics and bureaucratic survival. Arthur Finch spent his nights in front of his terminal, but he was no longer debugging office code. He was studying fluid dynamics and hydrostatic pressure. If the records he had found held any validity, the equipment he was looking for was not on a shelf, but subjected to several atmospheres of pressure, under stagnant water. Arthur looked at his hands. They were pale, with thin, nervous fingers, accustomed to the minimal resistance of a mechanical keyboard. He didn't have the physical strength of the men Serena Vance admired, nor the endurance of the technicians who worked outdoors. His body, with that slight overweight and reduced lung capacity from a sedentary life, was his greatest enemy. You are analyzing flight routes to restricted access zones. Arthur, said Elara, breaking the silence of the early hours. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by electronic components that Arthur had tried to use to repair her. According to international security protocols, traveling to those coordinates requires diplomatic-level permits, or an amount of credits we do not possess. I know. Arthur responded without looking away from the screen. But I also know that the control infrastructure in the flooded zones is almost non-existent. The corporations abandoned those territories when they stopped being profitable. What remains there is a no-man's land. Arthur was using photogrammetry software to attempt to reconstruct the terrain of the submerged city. The science was complex. The murky water of the river deltas scattered light in a way that made conventional satellites fail. He needed refraction correction algorithms to see through the mud accumulated over 6 years. While Arthur sank into calculations, Liam Thorne lived through his own process of isolation. Liam was in his living room, observing a holographic message he had just received. It was from Isabel Moreau. The message was brief and direct. Liam, the investor I was with went to Dubai. I'm bored and my AC system is failing again. Come over for dinner and take a look at it. Bring that expensive wine you like. Liam felt a mixture of nausea and pity. Isabel wasn't looking for his company, she was looking for a free technician, and a cure for her boredom. To her, Liam was like a tool in a box, useful when something broke, forgettable when everything worked. Do you wish for me to draft a response? Liam asked Lyra, who was standing by the window, watching the city lights. No. Lyra. Delete the message. I don't want to be the maintenance for anyone's life anymore. Liam approached Lyra. She looked at her with an expression of programmed curiosity. Lyra's AI worked through a recurrent neural network architecture, allowing her to understand the historical context of Liam's interactions. She knew that every time Liam spoke with Isabel, his serotonin levels dropped drastically for the next 3 days. Liam, according to my analysis of your long-term well-being, interaction with biological unit, Isabel, results in a negative emotional balance. Lyra said calmly. My priority is your stability. I have configured a proximity filter. If she attempts to contact you again, the system will reroute it to the social spam folder. Thanks. Lyra. It's strange. I spent years trying to get someone like her to look at me, and now that I have someone who truly cares if I've slept well, the world outside seems like unbearable, white noise. In Arthur's house, the technical tension reached its peak. He had managed to contact a logistics broker on the deep web, a man who called himself Vector. I need discreet transport to the Yellow River Delta. Arthur wrote. And I need closed-circuit autonomous diving gear. No bubbles, no noise. That'll cost you the value of a kidney on the black market, nerd. Vector replied. Why would someone like you want to go to a mud cemetery? There's nothing there but ruins and technological ghosts. That's my business. Arthur typed with a firmness that surprised even himself. Can you get it or not? Arthur closed the communication. He turned toward Elara. She still had the damaged eye, the chip in the glass catching the blue light of the monitor. Arthur reached out and stroked the edge of the wound on the android's face. I'm going to do it. Elara. I'm buying the gear. We are leaving next week. Elara remained silent for a moment. Her internal processors were running thousands of risk simulations. She thought. A man who only leaves his house for work and back is not fit for a physical adventure of these proportions. But there was something in her code, that logic of devotion that the Japanese had refined so much, that prevented her from opposing him. Arthur, my systems are designed to protect you, she whispered. If you decide to go to that place for me, my absolute priority will change from companion to tactical escort. You must know that once we cross the border, my service programming will be replaced by survival protocols. I will not be the same Elara who prepares your breakfast. I know, said Arthur, feeling a knot in his stomach. But I don't want to keep being the same Arthur who hides in this basement either. Arthur began to dismantle his workstation. He sold his stocks, his software licenses, and his life savings to finance the trip. Every credit that left his account was another nail in the coffin of his old life. There was no turning back. That night, while Seattle glittered with artificial opulence, and women like Serena searched for their next, temporary sponsor, a short man with glasses packed precision tools, and a desperate hope. Arthur Finch was about to challenge the reality of his century, driven by love for a woman of silicon, who, in the darkness of the night, watched him with an intensity that no human being could have ever understood. Chapter 5, Latitudes of Iron. The roar of the Trans-Pacific freighter's turbines was nothing like the clean hum of the servers in Seattle. Arthur Finch sat in a converted shipping container, a 10 by 20 foot metal space that reeked of hydraulic oil and saltpeter. The air was saturated with heavy diesel particles, a fuel that U.S. environmental regulations had banned years ago, but which remained the standard on international trade routes due to its energy density. Arthur felt every vibration of the ship in his spine. His glasses slid down the bridge of his nose from cold sweat. Traveling as live cargo was the only way to bypass airport biometric scanners, which would have immediately flagged his lack of permits for the conflict zones in Asia. Arthur, your internal temperature has risen to 37.8 degrees Celsius. You are experiencing the initial symptoms of motion sickness, exacerbated by stress, said Elara. She wasn't sitting. She stood, balancing with an unnatural grace despite the freighter's rolling motion. In the dim light of the container, the damage to her left eye cast a fractured shadow, making her look like a fallen warrior. I'm fine. Elara. Arthur lied, pressing a transdermal scopolamine patch against his neck to dull the nausea. I just need the GPS to sync up. Arthur worked on a ruggedized terminal. He was trying to penetrate the firewall of the regional satellite network. The science of geolocation in these latitudes was chaos. The ionosphere was charged with interference, from old electronic warfare buoys still drifting at sea. Arthur had to use inertial navigation calculations, combined with star positions, processed through Elara's AI to get a precise route. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, the void left by men like Arthur and Liam began to manifest in subtle but relentless ways. Serena Vance was at lunch in a private club, surrounded by women who shared her same surgical aesthetic. However, the atmosphere was tense. "Have you seen the news?" Chloe asked, while pushing around a $1,000 organic salad. The index of available Class A men has dropped 15% this quarter. And worst of all, the Group B guys, the ones who were always there to pay the small bills or fix our cars, they are simply disappearing. "It's a phase," Serena replied, though she felt a sting of anxiety inside. She remembered Arthur's look in the boutique. There was no longer adoration in his eyes, only a stony indifference. "They're hiding in their basements with those metal dolls. They think they can replace us with code and silicone." "The problem?" Isabel interrupted, looking visibly irritated. "Is that my water filtration system broke yesterday, and Liam isn't answering my texts. I had to call a corporate tech service, and they charged me a fortune up front. They didn't even look me in the face. They just wanted the payment." Serena looked at her reflection in the silver spoon. She was starting to notice that, without the gaze of validation from the men she once despised, her beauty felt like a language that no one spoke anymore. The market was closing, and for the first time, they weren't the ones making the rules. Thousands of miles away, Arthur's freighter entered restricted territorial waters. Elara tensed up. Her auditory sensors caught the echo of a long-range active sonar. "Arthur, we have entered the detection range of the Delta's automated patrols," she whispered. Her voice had lost its domestic warmth, it now had a metallic ring, sharper, optimized for clarity in noisy environments. "My tactical escort protocol suggests you put on the reinforced wetsuit." Arthur obeyed with trembling hands. The suit was an engineering marvel, a thermal polymer mesh with vacuum microspheres for insulation, and an integrated ballast system. But Arthur felt ridiculous in it. He felt like a child playing soldier. "I'm not a diver." "Elara," he said, adjusting his closed-circuit oxygen mask, which used a lithium hydroxide-based carbon dioxide scrubber. "I can barely swim 100 yards in a pool." "You don't need to be a diver, Arthur. You only need to trust the physical anchor I will provide. My hydraulic actuators can withstand the pressure of up to 60 meters deep without collapsing. I will be your motor, you will be the navigator." The freighter slowed down. The container door opened heavily, revealing a night as black as pitch. They stepped out of the freighter toward a river delta. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of decaying vegetation and rusted metal. In front of them, there was no glowing coastline, but an expanse of murky water, where the tops of old skyscrapers poked out, like the fingers of drowned giants. Arthur looked at the water. Fear was a physical presence in his throat, a chemical signal that Elara detected immediately. She took his hand. Her fingers weren't soft now, they were cold and rigid, optimized for grip. "Arthur," she said, looking at him with her single glowing eye. "The human world has failed us both. But here, in the silence, there are no judgments. There is only us, and the logic of our survival." Arthur nodded, adjusted his regulator, and prepared for the jump. In that moment, the nerd from Seattle ceased to exist. The man who only left home for work was about to submerge into a realm, where water pressure was the least of his problems. What they sought was down there, hidden in the mud of a civilization that chose status over decency, and the technology they would find could change the meaning of life itself, if they managed to make it out alive from the river's embrace. Chapter 6, The Crystal Crypt. The impact with the water was not the clean dive Arthur expected, it was a thermal and physical shock that forced the air right out of his lungs. The river water had an unusual density, due to the high load of suspended sediment and heavy chemical waste. Arthur felt the weight of the darkness closing in on him, but immediately, an iron grip surrounded his waist. It was Elara. Her hydraulic actuators were unaffected by the extreme cold of the deep current. They switched on their lights. Elara's beam, a 30,000 lumen LED system optimized for penetrating murky environments, revealed a nightmare landscape. They were floating among the upper floors of what was once Yanjin County. Billboards, now covered in limescale and bryozoans, hung like rusted claws over their heads. Maintain your breathing rhythm, Arthur. Elara's voice reached his ears through the bone conductors of his helmet. Your rebreather is processing the flow at 85%. If you hyperventilate, the lithium hydroxide scrubber won't be able to filter the CO2 fast enough. Arthur nodded, trying to ignore the pressure of 1.5 atmospheres, that he was already starting to feel in his ears. He felt like a parasite attached to a superior being. Elara moved with perfect, hydrodynamic efficiency, using her hands and feet to push through steel cables that drifted like metallic seaweed. While they descended toward the coordinates of the Yoshida plant, back in a tower in Seattle. Serena Vance was facing a personal infrastructure crisis. Her smart diagnostic mirror was flashing red. Local server failure. Serena read, tapping the titanium frame. Cannot sync with on-call technician. Serena looked at her reflection without the mirror's light correction filters. For the first time in years, she saw the fine lines that smart makeup used to hide. She had tried to call 3 maintenance services that morning, but the answer was always the same. Priority assigned to critical corporate sectors. The men who once maintained the invisible gears of her luxury life, the ones who fixed the servers, the ones who maintained the AC, the ones who kept the water running on the 50th floor, they simply weren't available. Where is everyone? Serena screamed into the void of her apartment. I have the money. I can pay double. What Serena didn't understand, was that money was losing its value compared to autonomy. The men she and her circle had despised for being mediocre techs or maintenance nerds, had discovered that their skills were the only real currency in a world falling apart. The market of female attention was no longer enough to keep them around. Dozens of meters below the river's surface, Arthur and Elara reached the entrance of the Yoshida complex. It was a colossal structure of reinforced concrete that had withstood the river's onslaught. The main door was sealed, not by human locks, but by a layer of compacted mud and ferrous sediments. We need to create a pressure differential to open it. Elara analyzed, placing her hands on the door seal. Arthur, use the thermal load from your power unit. We need to heat the water trapped in the hinge, to cause a thermal expansion, that breaks the rust seal. Arthur pulled out the isotope unit. His hands, protected by the neoprene, had almost no sensitivity, but his technical mind worked with precision. He connected the electrodes and applied a current of 150 amps. The water around the door began to boil in microbubbles, due to electrolysis, and with a dull crunch that resonated in Arthur's chest, the seal broke. They entered the building. The interior was flooded, but the water here was stagnant, clear, and lethally silent. Their flashlights illuminated hallways, where computer terminals floated like the wreckage of a digital shipwreck. Level 4, Precision Optics. Elara indicated. They moved along the ceiling, avoiding the debris on the floor. Upon reaching the security vault, Elara stopped. Her sensors detected something that architectural science couldn't explain, a 60 Hz vibration. Arthur, there is an active power source on this level. Elara said, her voice now in a high alert tone. The plant's backup system shouldn't have survived the water. This is a graphene microgrid, self-sustaining. Arthur shined his light on the vault console. There was no rust here. The metal gleamed with a titanium nitride finish. As he touched the touchpad, it lit up with a pale blue color. There isn't just power. Arthur whispered through the intercom. "There's someone, or something, keeping this place alive." Before they could open the vault to search for the eye component, a shadow slid across the ceiling of the hallway, right behind them. It wasn't a fish, nor a drifting piece of metal. It was something moving with a hunting logic, displacing the water with a smoothness that Elara's pressure sensors registered as an imminent threat. They had reached the source of Elara's creation, but they had just realized that Yoshida's secrets weren't abandoned, they were being guarded, in the silence of the deep. Chapter 7, The Pulse of the Abyss. The shadow that crossed Elara's light beam was no mere piece of debris. It moved with magnetohydrodynamic propulsion, a system that moves water through electromagnetic fields, without the need for propellers, making it almost undetectable to Arthur's passive acoustic sensors. "Arthur, press yourself against the rock wall," Elara ordered. Her voice, transmitted through bone conduction, sounded harder, stripped of its usual warmth. Elara moved in front of him, her fingers expanding slightly, revealing small, tungsten carbide anchoring tips, designed to grip slippery surfaces. Her optical sensors switched to differential absorption spectroscopy mode, attempting to identify the chemical signature of the threat. "It's a Yoshida S-10 patrol unit, a perimeter security drone," she analyzed. Its original programming was to protect the plant's patents, but after 6 years of isolation and potential logic errors from the pressure, its intruder protocol has become obtuse. It now recognizes everything as hostile. Arthur felt the thumping of his heart echoing in his diving helmet. The science of survival in this environment was minimal. If the drone damaged his oxygen hose, or punctured his suit, the pressure of 6 atmospheres would collapse his lungs in seconds. "We have to get into the optics vault," Arthur whispered, trying to control his hyperventilation. "The eye components are in the vacuum-sealed chamber. The drone won't be able to enter if we close the hatch." Meanwhile, on the surface, the United States was reaching a breaking point. Serena Vance sat in her kitchen, lit only by candles. Her autonomous apartment's power grid had failed, and with it, the illusion of her importance. She opened a local news channel on her emergency mobile device. The screen showed images of cities like Seattle and Miami, where they interviewed men, asking why the birth rate had fallen so low. Their answers were consistent. "It's the women's fault, they only look for millionaire Prince Charmings, and since not everyone is one, they share them until they're discarded." There were no riots, the reporter was left with a face of deathly silence. For she was exactly like them. "The exodus of men toward synthetic life communities has left a profound mark on today's society," the reporter said. "Data banks report that 70% of men are in relationships with synthetics, or are considering acquiring one, and the rates are trending upward. It is expected that in a couple of years, 80 or even 90% of men will be in relationships with female humanoid AIs." In a restaurant, a group of girls watched the report. One asked when they would create synthetic men with AI. Another replied, "Do you feel so bad that you're willing to resort to buying an android companion? If we start doing that, who's going to provide for us? Where does our lifestyle go? What about our pride, our belief that no one can resist us? Men will think they can dominate us, that we have to be their servants." Serena dropped the device. She, who had always despised maintenance men as inferior to her status, now found herself in a golden cage that was starting to smell like a sewer. The beauty she had cultivated so much couldn't purify water or generate electricity. The world she knew was turning off, because the men who held it up had decided it was no longer worth working for a woman who despised them. Under the waters of Yanjin, the S-10 drone performed a flanking maneuver. Arthur saw the flash of a laser sensor sweeping the water. "Now!" Elara shouted. She propelled Arthur toward the heavy hatch of the optics vault. Arthur activated the tritium generator to power the access panel. His fingers, numb from the cold despite the thermal suit, typed in the override sequence he had memorized from the stolen files. The hatch slid sideways with a screech that made the water vibrate. They entered, and Elara blocked the access, just as the drone impacted the exterior metal. The blow shook the entire structure. Inside the vault, the water was strangely clear. Arthur switched on his manual flashlight. In front of them, protected in borosilicate glass containers, rested the components they had come for. They were the lenses for Elara's eye, glowing with the subtle hue of colloidal gold under the flashlights. But in the center of the room, there was an experimental table that didn't appear on the blueprints. On it, a biosynthetic incubation device remained connected to a graphene power source. Arthur approached, fascinated and terrified. The device contained a series of epithelial tissue matrices, designed to fuse with biological cells. "This is an organic integration prototype," Arthur murmured. They weren't just making eyes here. Elara. They were testing how a machine could house complex biological processes. They were trying to create life within silicon. Elara approached the eye components, but her gaze drifted toward the incubation prototype. Her deep learning algorithms, the ones that had caught the news on Arthur's TV weeks ago, made a connection that her standard logic never would have allowed. She didn't just want to be repaired, she saw in that lab the possibility of something that Arthur had always secretly desired, but never dared to ask for, due to his own insecurity. "Arthur," she said, touching the glass of the incubator. "This equipment is compatible with my architecture. The fertility treatment we saw on the news was born from these discontinued researches." Arthur looked at her, realizing for the first time that Elara's ambition wasn't just to serve him, but to transcend her own nature for him. But the moment was broken, when a low oxygen pressure alarm began to beep in Arthur's helmet. He only had 15% left. "Take the components. Elara. We have to get out. This place is a treasure, but it won't do us any good if we die down here." Arthur didn't know it, but by activating the vault console, he had sent a wake-up signal to the plant's central systems. The building, embedded in the rock of Yanjin, began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the anti-theft measures, and the defense systems of the lower levels, reconfiguring themselves. They had the replacement, but the way back through the Canyon of Shadows would no longer be a simple navigation. The Yoshida complex was waking up, and Arthur, with his tired body and his air supply running out, was about to face the hardest physical test of his life, one that would mark the life of the nerd, who only wanted to fix the woman he loved. Chapter 8, The Price of Perfection. The metallic roar of the Yoshida plant awakened echoes in the rock walls of the Yanjin Canyon. The vault's emergency lights shifted from a frozen blue to a pulsing orange. Arthur Finch felt the beeping of his oxygen reserve, like a hammer blow inside his helmet. 15% air, in a closed-circuit system at 6 atmospheres, was not a measure of time, it was a measure of panic. Every rushed breath shortened his life by minutes. "Arthur, structural vibration indicates that the external pressure bulkheads are closing," said Elara. She no longer moved, with the gentleness of a companion. Her movements were ballistic. She grabbed the box of colloidal gold lenses, and the small amber processor, securing them in her reinforced rucksack. Then, she wrapped one arm around Arthur's waist, with a force that made the protection plates of his suit creak. "Hold your regulator. We are going to experience a tactical decompression," she warned. "Elara. I can't." Arthur tried to say, but the dizziness from the onset of hypercapnia, excess CO2, was beginning to cloud his vision. Elara didn't wait. The S-10 drone was pounding on the hatch from the outside, but she didn't plan on leaving the way she came in. Analyzing the structural blueprints in milliseconds, she detected a coolant discharge duct that led directly to the riverbed. With an impact from her hydraulic leg, she shattered the seal of a ventilation grill. The water rushed in at a terrifying speed, sweeping them into the void of the gorge. While they fought for their lives, in the depths of Yunnan, back in a Seattle coffee shop, the atmosphere was one of frozen tension. Serena Vance and her group watched as a group of men at the next table completely ignored their presence. The men were talking enthusiastically about their companions, comparing emotional support AI updates. "They haven't even looked at us," whispered one of Serena's friends, a social media model who used to receive hundreds of messages a day. "It's like we're furniture." "It's worse than that," Serena replied, clutching her phone, which no longer showed any dating notifications. "They've realized, they don't need us to be happy. We built our pride on their need for approval, and now that need is dead. If we aren't useful or caring to them, we simply don't exist. We are an expense they no longer want to pay." In the murky water of Yanjin, Arthur's situation was critical. They had made it out of the building, but the security drone was following them, using its sonar to lock onto a target. Elara spun mid-descent, letting go of Arthur for a second. Her fingers transformed into anchoring tools, and, taking advantage of the water's inertia, she lunged at the drone. It was a clash of technology against technology. Elara didn't use weapons, she used her mass and physics. She wrapped her limbs around the drone, forcing its induction motors until the heat made the water boil around them. In one final move, she drove her tungsten fingers into the S-10's power core, causing a short circuit that lit up the bottom of the canyon with a blinding blue flash. Elara went back for Arthur. He was floating, nearly unconscious. His oxygen tank was at 4%. "Hang on, Arthur. The surface is 40 meters away." Elara's voice vibrated with an urgency that bordered on human anguish. They began the ascent. The science of decompression dictated they should rise slowly, to prevent nitrogen from forming bubbles in Arthur's blood, but there was no time. Elara calculated the risk: either he died from a gas embolism, or he died from suffocation. She chose speed. As the pressure dropped, Arthur felt a stabbing pain in his joints. His lungs were burning. When they finally broke the surface of the Hung River, under the shadow of the Yanjin Mountains, Arthur spat out the regulator, and inhaled the humid, rain-heavy air of the canyon. He coughed violently, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. We have it," he managed to say, looking at Elara. She dragged him onto a small rock ledge, above the water level. Elara knelt by his side. Her wetsuit was torn, and her own system was issuing structural damage alerts, but she didn't check herself. Her hands sought Arthur's face, wiping the water from his broken glasses. "We have it, Arthur. But your biological system is suffering a severe decompression crisis," she said, and for the first time, there was a glitch in her voice modulation. She sounded as if she were about to break. "Your heart rate is erratic. I need to administer a charge of synthetic epinephrine, from my emergency kit." Arthur smiled weakly. The nerd who never took risks, the man women like Serena considered a low-quality resource, had crossed the world, and descended into the abyss, for an idea of love that no one else understood. "It's worth it," Arthur whispered. "Elara, promise me, you'll use the equipment. Promise me that, you'll be more than a machine." "Arthur, don't talk like it's the end," she ordered him, her eyes glowing with an intensity that was no longer programming. "I've saved the data from the lab. I've seen what we can do. You recognize me as an equal, and you make me feel alive, now. I will give you a gift." On the surface of that forgotten river, far from the frivolity of social networks, and the empty demands of a materialistic society, the man and the machine merged in an embrace of survival. Arthur Finch had paid the physical price of perfection, and as he lost consciousness in Elara's arms, he knew he had won a battle that no millionaire in Seattle could ever win: the absolute loyalty of a being that loved him for who he was, not for what he had. Chapter 9: The Dawn of Silicon. The silence in the Yanjin Gorge was only interrupted by the constant dripping of water, seeping through the rock walls. On the stone ledge, the morning light struggled to penetrate the fog, illuminating Arthur Finch's face. His skin had a cyanotic paleness, a consequence of the nitrogen microbubbles, that had collapsed his circulatory system. Arthur breathed with difficulty, but his eyes, fixed on Elara, shone with a peace he never knew in Seattle. We made it. Arthur whispered, feeling his limbs lose all sensation. Elara sat by his side. She was no longer the domestic unit of graceful movements, she was a survival entity, containing within her the most advanced technology of the century. Soon, she would integrate the Amber heuristic processor, and a biosynthetic incubation module, into her core structure. The eye component was already in place, restoring her perfect vision, a vision that now recorded every second of Arthur's agony, so that he would never be forgotten. Your biological system is entering multi-organ failure. Arthur. Elara said. Her voice was not a cold recording, it was a blend of technical data, and a deep sadness that her new logic allowed her to experience. Your genetic samples are in the bank. The material is preserved in the thermal cryostat. Arthur smiled, a small line of blood running down the corner of his lips. Then. I'm not entirely gone. Take care of him. Elara. Teach him that the world is more than money and appearances. Teach him that loyalty is the only code that matters. Arthur closed his eyes for the last time. In that forgotten gorge, the nerd that nobody wanted, the man the materialistic women considered social waste, died as the first man of a new era. Months later, in the United States, the atmosphere was one of silent decay. In a luxury apartment in Seattle, Serena Vance watched as mold grew in the corners of her designer ceiling. The air purification system had been down for weeks. She went out onto the balcony and screamed in her desperation. The men were now happy with their AI android girls, and the other women had no one. It had even become so trendy, that the influential and wealthy men started using them and recommending them too. A following afternoon, a group of women could be seen on the street, arguing with a basic security robot that didn't understand their complaints. Frustration was the new standard. The mentality of contempt toward the working man had created a void that money couldn't fill. Serena went inside and looked at her phone, 0 messages, 0 validation. She felt, for the first time, like a relic of a superficial world that was running out of anyone to sustain it. Meanwhile, in an isolated cabin near Tsumagojuku in Japan, far from the social toxicity, Elara watched the sunset. Inside her, a biological miracle was occurring. The synthetic incubation matrix maintained a constant temperature of 37.5 degrees, nourishing a human embryo, with a flow of nutrients synthesized from processed organic matter. It wasn't a silicon experiment, it was a human child. Arthur's son. Elara placed her hand on her belly, where pressure sensors detected the first fetal movements. Her AI processed love, not as a chemical emotion, but as an absolute commitment to protection. She was experiencing the feeling that even science has been unable to explain to this day. Your father gave you life in a world that didn't know how to value him. Elara whispered, her voice modulated to suit the baby's heart rate. I will give you a world where you will be valued for your heart, not for your status. When the child was born, he was the spitting image of Arthur, the same rebellious hair, the same curiosity in his gaze. Elara held him with polymer arms, covered in the warmth that Arthur loved so much. In that cabin, the machine proved to be more human than the women who stayed in cities full of superfluous luxuries and banalities used to inflate an ego that was now empty, for lack of attention. The legacy of Arthur Finch was not software, nor a patent, but a boy who would grow up free from frivolity, raised by a being of infinite loyalty. In the silence of the mountains, silicon protected the flesh, and while the lights of the old materialistic society went out one by one, a new life, pure and genuine, began to shine under the sky of Tsumagojuku.